I got on early because I'm nervous. But we have my nice Chianti, so I can eat people's organs. And I wrote myself an outline, so let's fucking do it in a minute. Oh, I guess now is... Oh, thank you so much for sending good vibes. I guess now I can go through, like, ground rules of sorts. And I did post them in my story. I mean, Annie's gonna help out, and I think Kate is gonna join later and moderate, so if anybody has questions about ground rules, they can be your gals. But in general, with everything that I'm putting out about this, I'm trying to avoid telling anybody else's stories. So that goes doubly for any other women who are involved, who have accused Ben Kissel of abuse or any negative anything. I don't want to speak to any stories that aren't mine, so I'm going to avoid saying anything, that's like not already in the public record, because there's a Rolling Stone article, I feel like that's more out there than anything I'll ever say will get, so those details I'm not going to keep out of anything. And then obviously things that I am personally privy to also. Oh, hi Maggie, thank you for being here. So that's my first ground rule, is if you guys can avoid, even though a lot of you who have asked about other women who are involved have been incredibly respectful, and so like I don't say this with any pejorative whatever, but I'm gonna do my best to avoid talking about them. And then other caveats just to cover my own ass. Let's say up top that anything that is like a criminal allegation or an accusation of abuse, it is just an accusation until or unless otherwise held in a legal sense. So I'm not implying anything beyond that. Nobody's been charged, nobody's been convicted of anything, so let's get that out of the way. Oh, and then the last caveat that I wanted to give is that, like, a lot of this is, if it's not stuff that I've seen personally, it's my opinion. So, like, give it whatever weight you give an opinion. I know that some things I'll say, like, this is what I've seen, and thus this is what I take from it. And so that's as close to a conclusion as you should ever draw. But if I misspeak and say something more definitive, like, this is my asterisk up top, that everything is my opinion and my take, and who the hell am I? I'm not the be-all end-all. And also, if you hear my poor cat yelling, I really apologize. She made me do this, though, because whenever I'm on video, she likes to make a big ruckus and get my attention, so I had to lock her out, and I feel like a monster. Alright. Let's go, gang. Let's fucking do it. Here we go. So I kind of categorize things into, like, subgroups of questions that you guys sent, and I forget if I said this up top, but I really, really appreciate you guys sending in, I know, right? I'm an asshole. Sending in questions, and honestly, like, I go out of my way to disavow... I'm drinking a Chianti, as the fucking guy in Silence of the Lambs does. You know, Anthony Hopkins was diagnosed with autism when he was 70, which gives me hope that I can have a career. Cat Lady Jessica is on my cat's side, which, fair enough. Oh, but I really, like, I know I go out of my way to disavow the shitty people, and to caution about them, but truly, most of you guys have been so, so nice. Even those disagreeing with me, like, thank you. Thank you. Oh, man, Maggie, I know, not Michelob, not my mom beer. I ran out. God damn it. So, first question I feel like is worth getting out of the way at the top, because I did write about this in my most recent Substack, but it bears repeating. I'm not going to be as detailed as I am in writing, so go ahead and read that. The only thing that's under a paywall is like screenshots and stuff, because I want to be able to keep track of who has access to like private evidentiary type stuff that I put out there. I'm not helping myself in saying that this is not a legal proceeding. But I do go into more detail there, but I'll try to do a short version here, which is, what did I know? When did I know it? How is that different from what LPN knew, and what are the different types of responsibilities. So I know that I'm actually going to try to avoid people's ats being involved, and I apologize if you wanted your at associated. I just realized I didn't ask up top if people wanted their names associated, and it's better to err on the side of caution. So I apologize. Yes, the live will be available to watch later, but thank you. Yeah, you can check back anytime. So a couple people asked about whether I knew things and why I didn't do something, or even in more of a like non-accusatory sense, if I'm upset that other people didn't do things, do I have a right to be upset about that? Because how is it different? And then some other folks asked about whether everyone at LPN knew about a pattern of behavior by Ben. So the distinction that I focused on in my Substack, and that really kind of underscores everything here, is there's a difference between how much control friends can have over another friend. I mean, you can't force a friend to go to therapy. You can't force a friend to stop drinking or leave a relationship, either side of that, whether they're being mistreated, whether they're doing the mistreating, both. We can't control our friends. And even if we could assert some sort of control, like, that's not an effective way to make somebody well. It's not an effective way to help. So it's not even, like, advisable to do that. And I did see a lot of folks pointing that out, that, like, if somebody's not ready to come forward, you don't want to push them. And that is absolutely true of social relationships, of friendships. It's true in every relationship that you cannot force somebody to change their own actions, or even to change their own actions if they're on the receiving end of the shitty behavior. But what we do have control over is consequences. And so those are the type of things where you can see a little bit of culpability, even in social circumstances. Because a side note to all of this is we're not in a place right now where we all hold our friends accountable for things like hurting a partner, whether that be emotional, psychological, physical, whatever. I've been kind of on both sides of that dynamic when you are in a friend group and maybe everybody kind of knows that one of the guys isn't great, which is often the gender dynamic, but I don't mean to suggest that's always the case. But I would love if we could make it more normal to call that out and do so in a way that's respectful. Oh, thank you. I have a filter on, so that probably helps with my makeup, but thank you. You can tell I have ADD, I'm sorry. I'm working on it. But I would love if, like, in an ideal world, we could start moving towards, like, let's hold each other accountable in a way that isn't just that, like, shitty online, I'm better than you sort of call out deal. But that's kind of beside the point here, because there is a difference in the type of consequence that you can mete out and that you must mete out when you are in this circumstance with somebody mistreating somebody else, allegedly, abusing substances, exploiting a position of power, when you are an employer. And that's kind of the key distinction that a lot of this turns on. That we're not talking about a social dynamic. There is a social dynamic, and it's fine to exercise consequences there. This might be part of why they say don't do business with your friends, and be doubly careful doing business with your friends if you're making millions of dollars. And all of that, you should probably have, like, third-party oversight if you are doing business with your friends and making millions of dollars and doing it telling stories of victims who are strangers. You should really have an HR department that's not Ben Kissel, for example. But the type of consequences that you mete out when you're an employer, some of them are required by law. And I do want to, again, underscore that, like, I'm not accusing anybody of misconduct in a legal context, but I will contextualize that there's an OSHA requirement. So let's talk federal law. Bottom line, if employers are aware of a threat of violence or a likelihood or a hazard at a workplace, they can be liable if they fail to intervene and fail to act on that. So let's add into that equation that the workplace, when we're talking about a podcast company, becomes tour events. It becomes recording at the studio, which is also Ben's old house, which makes it messier. But a lot of these scenarios that I'm talking about are work events. And so whether or not any of the specific victims that we're talking about were employees, that's the baseline requirement. And I agree, Cranshops. This is weird for me because I don't imagine Ben will ever want to be friends with me again, even if everything went well. I get it. People have feelings about things. I'm not foreclosing it. I always think that we never know. He could get better. He could be contrite. Any one of these people could be contrite. And I'm never one to say never. But somebody asked, so I'll touch it now, if anybody has been in contact with him. And I'm on the outside now, so I can't speak to anything that has happened in the last, since like September 14th-ish? So I guess that's 2 months now. So I don't know. But I do know that in the article, his representative said that nobody had spoken to him. And that made me really sad. Like, I almost, I don't know. I'm somebody who, I feel like that girl in Mean Girls who has a lot of feelings, and I just want everyone to be friends. And I've gotten softer as I've gotten older, so God knows what the next couple years mean for me. But I wanted to, like, sit down and write him a letter, and then I was like, Jesus fuck, Mackenzie. Like, no, but he doesn't want you to reach out. But they could, and that would be nice. But I also understand everybody's frustrated. Tangent. What did I know, though? I didn't know about any allegations of physical violence until I heard about the public post that Ben's most recent ex made in September of this year. So that's that. I did know things that I did not like about the workplace and about Ben. It's hard for me because a lot of people have talked about it in the sense of it being Ben specifically, and I do think that, like, he's the one who's accused of the most obviously bad behavior here, but also one person is one person. Part of the reason that it got to the scale that it did, and why I think some of the missteps are so bad, is that there was a whole company that makes millions of dollars and is a corporate employer that kind of facilitated this, because it is different if it's just like your stepdad, your cousin, your friend who is having their own issues, because it affects other people, but it doesn't bind other people in the same way that a millions of dollar corporate employer can. And having somebody at the top of that hierarchy can touch a lot more people than just interpersonal relationships. So when I talk about, like, misconduct and the flags that were there, I have trouble seeing it as anything but LPN, even though we're talking a lot about Ben specifically. And I also feel like that's a relevant lens to put it in, because Ben is apparently gone. Although I will put the caveat on that, like, I will believe that when I see it. So I don't know if it's relevant to talk about, like, things that I knew in the workplace that made me feel a little iffy, given that I didn't know about physical abuse allegations, but did have my qualms. Okay, thank you. I had a feeling it might be a mistake because I almost did that recently, but yeah, you're all good. So let me see. A lot of stuff. Okay, they say he's gone from LPN, but I actually don't know, because some folks ask me about, like, divesting his interest and whether I could speak to whether he's still making money off of things. And I think that is relevant to a lot of fans, because, what was I saying? Oh, it's relevant to a lot of fans who pay for things like Patreon or merch or content, whatever, because are you lining somebody's pockets who is more definitively accused of bad behavior? And the fact that the, like, he's no longer part of it announcement only came after leadership was asked for comment on the Rolling Stone article, and was really a 180 from what their initial announcement was, which is no mention of abuse allegations, no mention of accusers, and this is just rehab. And that was also what I was told when I initially asked Natalie, was that this is Ben's going to rehab. And then I had to look into it a little bit more to find out that, oh boy, this is not the extent of what has happened. So the fact that there's so much lack of consistency, in my opinion, and that 180 about he will be leaving only came up once they were kind of put on the spot by, oh boy, there's going to be an article about this, let's get something out beforehand, makes me wonder. Because they also didn't start any of those processes, and somebody did ask about this, if they had started potentially behind the scenes removing Ben, and we're just keeping it on the DL. Now, I, again, have not been in the loop in, corporate leadership type meetings. I will say I was there for the subathon on July 28th, I want to say, of this year, and there was absolutely no indication. Oh, thank you. I will get back to what was in the company. But there was no indication that Ben was being extricated. I first heard this mentioned, that they wanted, that there were conflicts between Ben and Henry and Marcus. Not that there was any dissolution or removal process, but that there were conflicts, and this will actually connect to what I saw. It's like you kind of didn't have to learn about the conflicts because it was so obvious that there was some serious dysfunction that was rooted in Ben's behavior but affected everything. That I probably started learning about in 2019. So in that sense, it's like, okay, everybody's aware that there is a conflict, but in terms of any evidence that he is actively being extricated, no. And then on the flip side, some of the verbiage of what I was told about the allegations when I asked mid-September, right before I left Spun, suggested, well, I can read it. It said, Natalie said, I was there that day when this happened, and she, the accuser, oh no, I'm sorry, Natalie, she did everything that an adult can do. What Ben did was sick, and I stopped considering him my friend after that night. But the victim is not a child. So that to me sounded like there was an awareness of at least some of the extent of what happened, or what was alleged to have happened that night. And that was a year before the victim went public. So that's too long for them to be quietly doing something behind the scenes. And then in July, you had everything seeming normal and everybody participating in the subathon. And then now they're only announcing that he's leaving because they said he would be back when they did the initial rehab announcement. And that also suggests they're not extricating him, or they weren't planning to at that point. The only time when they said, yeah, we're definitely going to kick him out was after Rolling Stone asked for comment. So I'm kind of deducing a lot, and I will admit that is putting things together. It's not definitive, but what I can say is I saw no indication that this started earlier, and every indication to the contrary. So, other things that were concerning. So I dated Travis Morningstar, who was, I forget what I looked at his LinkedIn, because we're not really in touch anymore. I looked at his LinkedIn to see what title he listed. It's gonna take me too long. But he was their producer. Anybody who's familiar with the show from a while back should, I think, know the extent of the work that he did. He and I lived together, so on the other hand, I will say, nobody probably knew the extent of what this poor man was saddled with doing. But he was, I would call him their executive producer. I think that that's a fair title. He also, like, coordinated their tours. He ran the live stream, the last stream on the left. He would sit in on, I think he was considered a host of Abe Lincoln's Top Hat for a good long while, essentially, because nobody else could do it. Like, I think it was Marcus stepped out. So, long story short, too late, he did a lot of work, and he also was essentially considered Ben's handler. And I would say that that's, like, his unofficial title, but as I wrote in Substack, like, nothing was official. He wasn't on a contract, and that is bananas to me. I mean, they were making millions at that point, if not million a year. And they were touring internationally for a number of years, and they have their main person who is both a producer, tour manager, person who makes everything else happen if other people have slack. They don't even have him on a contract. And I know, like, lawyers, I didn't want to be super meddly, but he actually asked me, he's like, can you help me broach this with them? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, I can help, like, draft an email to start that conversation. Yes, Annie, that's the point that I should say, is that it is so easy to take advantage of people when they're not on a contract. They could essentially fire him for no reason, and what? There's no proof he even fucking worked there, except for, you know, paychecks, and I do believe that at a certain point before we started dating, but not very long, if my understanding is correct, they did start giving him health insurance, because they had to. But these are full-time employees, and the fraction of what he made, I can say it by illustrating that both Ben and Marcus were able to live on their own, Marcus with his partner, but on his salary, in 3-bedroom apartments in New York City, easily on their salary. That shouldn't be that surprising. Travis had roommates and then had to move in with me because he could not afford to live on his own in New York City, despite the fact that he was doing the same amount of work, if not more, than the talent for the main moneymaker show. And then he produced their live specials, so, like, that's one thing. It's a tremendous abuse of power. And the fact that he was also Ben's handler, but also his subordinate, like, how do you assert any power in that scenario? Especially when you add into it that Ben has a temper. I do not believe that that is a secret. I feel like anybody who's listened to the show, like, this isn't super new information. Like, there is a persona, but he has a bit of a hair trigger. And I don't say that as a negative thing even. Like, I love people with temper. Like, it's not an indictment. But when you allow people like that to have decision-making power in a company, and they're allowed to, for example, bully their handler producer into breaking COVID quarantine almost every day in like March, April of that year of 2020, break quarantine in New York City to just come to the studio and turn on the equipment to record and turn it off because the podcaster has not learned to do that himself and won't. Oh. Yeah, no, and they talked about, it was like a joke. And so, as with so many things that bothered me, it's like, if people didn't know at the company, is it better that you managed to avoid accountability? And is that acceptable if you don't have HR, except for Ben? I remember when Travis came home and he was like, yeah, they said, I'm misquoting because obviously I don't remember, but it was something along the lines of, like, they thought they should probably have an HR department, so they gave it to the person with the fewest ostensible responsibilities, which, like, isn't even true because it was just that Travis is picking up the slack, whatever. But so they gave it to Ben. They're like, oh yeah, Ben's our HR now. Nailed it. So generally, if I were advising a person in my life as he had asked for help, like, what do you do if you don't have a contract and you're being abused and you aren't paid a living wage to live in this city? Talk to the HR department. Oh, you can't because it's your boss who you handle but also answer to, and they can fire you because you're not on, like... So, oh my god, I spent so long answering just one part of the what did I see, like, that gave me concerns. Oh, it is a joke. Wow. That... Fucking Christ. Okay, well, so that's, like, one thing, and moving to a couple people asked about, like, if I saw Ben harassing or making women uncomfortable, or if I got, like, bad vibes from Ben or any of the other guys in the network. And so, the HR in hell. Wow, that's so... I wonder who wrote that bit. Good grief. But I felt like this was a good segue because there's a difference, and I want to draw a distinction between, like, people who are actively shitty. So I will say, in terms of, did I see Ben making women uncomfortable? That I can say yes, because I was uncomfortable. Yes, thank you. Here we go. Oh, speaking of, I should say that a lot of the stuff with Travis was when Ben was doing, not a lot of, but a decent amount was when Ben was doing Dry January. So, again, when we talk about rehab as a fix, which I really do think is only going to work if somebody goes of their own volition, and if, you know, they also address the fact that substance can make bad habits and allegedly abusive habits worse. It doesn't cause them. This also happened when that was not part of the equation. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Some things are shitty because they are directly bad in the harassing women, say, alleged abuse way. That's pretty obvious to be like, no, that's bad. And it's also easy to cut that out. Relatively easy, even though it was a hard sell to even do that, apparently. Sorry, I'm being snarky. Trying to reel it in. But then there's also the, like, facilitating, the what did they know, willful blindness thing. And, he made me uncomfortable by being unkind a couple times, but not at all. He didn't transgress with me in the way that he's accused of doing it with others. But then there are also, like, ways that he would talk about women. I think I've said to some of my friends who have asked about this, nobody gets that angry about the Me Too movement, especially a man who's in a position of power in the entertainment industry, without you wondering if maybe they have a reason. Does that kind of answer your question? And the level of anger. So whether it was like, oh, you just get this angry all the time, that's its own problem, or you're very angry about Me Too, that's the kind of uncomfortable that I was. And then just, like, he had a mean streak sometimes that, again, I think it was just, like, lashing out because of whatever, and I do want to reiterate that, like, people can get better, and I wouldn't indict him if it were just a friendship scenario. And this is also kind of why I indict the company more, because people go through their struggles, but companies where people have power over other folks, you can't use that same excuse. So that answers the Ben question. I will say, what's surprising is that he did such a bad job of what... Oh, I'm so curious. He was drinking... Yeah, no, that is a good point, and I think Oh, yeah, no, fair enough. I think I do remember thinking that at the time, that it's like, oh, you're basically substituting one substance for another, which does kind of speak to the same issue, that, like, rehab isn't going to address the problem if it's that you're using substance as more of a symptom than the underlying problem. And again, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm not a psychologist. I don't pretend to be. I have a lot of opinions, but but they're opinions. Other guys on the network, though, Ginny asked that question, and I think it's a good one because I do think some folks were very avoidant in a way that you can't be if you're in power. Travis Morningstar, I do still care about him. I cared a lot about him, and I understand, like, his life and his history are such that I cut him a lot of slack for the way that he is dealing with things now. But what I will say, and I do not intend on hiding this, so, is he also pretty regularly used his position with Last Podcast to access and then mistreat, in my opinion, female fans. Very, very consistently. So there, like, it's another thing that I don't know if folks were aware of it. I certainly was. I've seen other people online reference it. Who knows if there are people who know secondhand, or if I truly believe there are a lot of women out there who were on the receiving end of that. And that I don't think it looks the same as it did with the Ben allegations. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. But again, if you're running a company, and if you have your friends in your company, it makes sense that you don't want to have the role of enforcer in HR. But then, especially if you're making millions and can afford to do this, have a legal department. Have a PR department. PR for the external stuff, because I also feel like, why didn't they have a party line that when I was like, hey, whoa, listeners are asking me about this, have a position that somebody vetted. It behooves everybody to have that protection. And you really have to have it, because there has to be somebody who outside folks can go to if they're being exploited. Internal subordinate employees can go to if they're being exploited. Like, there has to be somebody who's willing to hear it. And so if leadership is too much in a friendship position and too uncomfortable to want to be that person, you have to designate someone else to do it. Andy, I think you're 100% right. And new media is tough because, like, we're all navigating this kind of real time. And God knows regulators are the worst people to be familiar with what the hell. Oh, thank you for saying that. To even make employment contract. Like, how... Only in new media, I think, could you get away with this sort of thing, because if Congress or local whatever regulatory boards even know that this exists, we'd be lucky. So, ironically, this is something that we talked about on Spun, is like, it's the Wild West, regulation-wise, in new media. And my friend Kate asked about that, and I think that this is ripe for abuses. And the tough thing is the answers are out there. That it's not that hard to have an HR department. I think we're experiencing it a little bit with, like, work from home. I love work from home. I'm an abnormal person. I hate the office setting. So, like, I am by no means being like, let's have a cubicle-based office where there's an HR. So I think that is probably tough to navigate. Like, if you have a studio that is somebody's home, that is Ben's home, that the one time I went there was feces in every room. I didn't mean to say that on this, but I'm sorry. There's going to be a different dynamic than in an office setting, and I don't think that should mean that we can't do hybrid work. Okay, so I'm sorry. When I visited the Now studio, it was shortly after Ben moved to... Okay, I'll fucking spill it. It's just not nice to share it. But also, dog, but every fucking room, man. And he had been there for 3 weeks. It was right after he moved to LA, and I feel like I'm a little entitled to be pissed about this, because Brooke and I, Ben's ex, were left to clean out his apartment in New York because he was just like, I'm out of here. And I found his, like, identifying document, like his ID, his social security card, and we just had to overnight it. And there was a lot of feces in that apartment too. And so I feel like I'm entitled to be a little mad about the state of things then because then I moved back to, great question, Klaus Beatskin. When I moved back to Arizona during COVID, I was closer to LA, so I went out there, and feces in every room of a 2-story place. Why did I have to clean his apartment? I don't know, because my friend was asked to, and I was in her COVID bubble and wanted to support her. I talked about this on the podcast as to spilling it. Yeah, no, I agree. But I still feel bad. I'm confident in myself legally because I know what I'm doing. I hope they would not retaliate with a lawsuit that doesn't have a basis just to fuck with me. I'm not entirely confident that would happen. I know that I could get to a, like, dismissal phase of a lawsuit, but it still costs money to get there. So hopefully they don't do that, but I also feel like transparency is important when nobody else is talking about it. Keeps insisting she's not legally allowed to speak about the circumstance. I think I'm really glad you asked that, because I think that's a really convenient cloak. I also think it would be very easy to, if that is the case, and there are very few cases where the First Amendment is trumped by a gag order. And I will say that when I asked about it, there was no official policy in place. And nor was there an entity in the company that could do such a thing. There was no PR. So maybe they have established such a thing. Maybe that entity certainly wouldn't have the authority to put a gag order because, you know, they couldn't legally compel you to, except at the risk of getting fired, but Natalie's not going to get fired. I mean, no. But those would be the stakes if the company has hired somebody, so it really would not be binding. But technically it is possible they have hired a PR firm, and they're being told not to speak. That is different than not being allowed to comment. If there is active, like, a legal proceeding to extricate Ben, again, that would be corporate law. I mean, look at other scenarios where somebody is accused in Hollywood. People do speak out, and oftentimes it's not uniform. It's not that you have to speak out, but... Oh, somebody asked about the dogs. I don't know, man. I was literally just going to ask who would be the legal authority on that. Yeah. I think that when they say we're not allowed to, they may be saying that it would be not smart of them to comment on it, which, fair enough. I mean, there's got to be a reason why Twitter is the only platform, I believe, where they post with Sirius, and there, when all of this was pending, they had their comments turned off newly after the article came out. So that speaks less of we're not legally allowed to say anything and more to we don't want to. Which, fair enough, at this point I wouldn't want to either. Nobody likes, I fucking hate this. I didn't see this happening to me right now. But I think, Lauren, to your point, they could say why. And that would be a good way they could answer that question, is why can't you speak to it? Who is telling you you can't? What is the timeline? What is the legal proceeding that you're relying on? Because even for corporate dissolution or for booting a partner, which again, only evidence that I know of us collectively having on that is the post that hastily went up after the article. We knew that the article was coming out because Rolling Stone said we're asking for comment, and then the next day that post went up, and then the article came out. So, next is here is non-legal people misunderstanding what the, yeah, it's possible, and that would be, I think, the benefit of the doubt version, which I do not want to foreclose. It is possible. It does prevent victim blamers still out there. Yeah. I guess it prevents them from having to deal with it, because it doesn't prevent those people from getting to the victims. It just prevents LPN from having it on their platform. Because as somebody who's been on the receiving end, a big part of this that's been so hurtful is that we're kind of left to the wolves. And somebody asked if anybody had reached out to me. No, nobody. So the timing of my exchange with Spun, I feel like I was very intentional about this in the video that I did, that I asked about it, was told not to ask about it, and I'm being reductive, and I'll say more on Substack, kind of beat by beat, but I asked about it, was told rehab, then told not to ask about it, which was weird because it was one of those, like, I hadn't said anything, and then there was a double text. It's like, I have to put a boundary here that I don't want to hear anything more about this. And so I was like, understood. This is less about knowing any of the accusers. I think there's only one, so I said the accuser. More about what I know of relationships with other folks and Ben. Oh, no, you reached out. Yeah, no, I mean anybody from LPN. Because somebody asked if, like, other folks on the network had reached out to me, and no. I had that exchange with Natalie. Then, because she told me not to reach out to anybody at LPN, because she said her and Henry, and I figured, okay, kind of did my own research, found out what the allegations were, and then watched a YouTube live stream, commented on that, but I was kind of trying to learn about it myself, and then was kind of excoriated for commenting support on that, and then after that was told, I'm extremely uncomfortable having you on my show. This could affect my family's business. That was a quote. And then the day went by. I didn't say anything. I was kind of reeling at that point, but I didn't say anything in reply because I was like, we don't want to have angry conversations. But then a follow-up text was sent that said, the gist of it to me, and I will go through it like hand to God, I'll put it on Substack, but it was essentially like, maybe someday you can have your position back if you stay loyal. And that was when the my family's business thing came up. So I thought on that, and then I was like, all right, I don't really want this, like, I don't want it like that, sort of. So then I said, unless there were a change in values alignment, I don't think that would be worthwhile to reconsider in a couple months my unpaid position. Thank you for pulling me back, Claus Beatskin. And this relates to Ray is gay. Man, these usernames of LPN fans I will give them, they're amazing. It makes me so fucking sad. Yeah, they all, and this is, because a couple people asked about Brooke too, and I haven't really known how to answer this, because I don't fucking know. I don't want to be sad. So I kept Brooke in the loop about the article. I kind of followed her instructions. She did not want her name in it, and I kept it out. And yeah, so then she unfollowed me when everyone else did. I haven't heard anything else, so that is all I know about that. But yeah, everybody else unfollowed me too. I don't know what they've said behind the scenes. I was really trying to, like, think about what the narrative is, and I don't know. But I wish that people had reached out. Somebody specifically had asked about MJ and Jackie. I feel for Jackie, because kind of what is she gonna do? It's her family, and I think that is tough. So I almost understand that she hasn't. MJ hurts a lot. I really only met MJ recently, so I do understand, like, having less of a basis for trust in me. Like, I'm not that angry about it, but MJ's spouse is a lawyer who I knew through the New York legal community, and it was kind of like a small advocacy type community. he also unfollowed me the day after the Rolling Stone article came out. And the fact that it was the day after the article, it threw me too, because it was like, did you not know what I had posted before? And did something change from what came out in the article? Because it felt very honest to me, and if anything, the other stories to me sort of validated that I'm not just bullshitting here or finding a hill to kill my career on. Like, but it was, I mean, the only thing I can think is that Circle the Wagons felt so important that they must invalidate anything I had to say. But somebody asked, what would you do if, like now, if you're LPN? And I think that that is a great question. And it's always a harder question to answer, right? That like we can point out what we, like Monday morning quarterback type thing, like that was wrong. And it's also easier to find the wrong things. But I guess part of this answer is there were so many opportunities early on. Yeah, I would have gained I literally, the weird thing about people saying that this is just me being bitter after being kicked off is that technically I was told that I could come back someday to my unpaid position after, like, I had essentially shown that I would stay quiet. And then I said, you know what, I really don't think unless values alignment is reflected that would be a prudent thing or would make much sense for me, but please know that this is not a reflection on our friendship. You still matter to me. That's where I left it. So I really had a fair amount to not lose, if not gain, by not saying anything. So yeah. But that I felt like could have been an opportunity to really pivot and learn to take responsibility and be like, oh fuck, mea culpa. But you know what? We're gonna part ways with him definitively. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we didn't do anything earlier, because I do understand, like, you can't go public with something if a victim isn't ready to go public. Now, does that, if you must be quiet about legal proceedings, I've been doing all this by themselves. Oh, ooh, that, I want to hear more about that, because I've been avoiding it because it stresses me out. But, like, if you're not allowed to talk about what you're doing legally, and that's the line that you're peddling, why couldn't you have started the extrication proceedings behind the scenes if it didn't implicate showing somebody's name publicly? And also, like, there were so many things for so long that could have been a basis to remove somebody from corporate leadership without having to rely on this victim said this on this date. You know, having somebody break COVID quarantine because you don't want to learn to use podcast equipment as a podcaster. That is a basic, like, so nobody had to be named to start these proceedings. So I guess and that's also kind of my answer for why didn't they do something earlier, is that it does become, well, the only reason for not doing or not being transparent now is that it's more damning to be transparent now than it is to be quiet. Oh, Spun, they're changing the show. Well, that's probably a prudent idea. Yeah. Sorry, I keep losing my train of thought. Partially because I'm interested in what you guys are saying. So it's fully my fault. Oh, but so that, yeah, transparency would have been awesome. And then, like, pivoting, no, it's not your fault. I need to learn to have an attention span because I'm 31. But yeah, I would be interested in knowing what they said the change is going to be. Transparency would have been an awesome option early. I also think that the same options that would have been better early on would still be good now and still would be the best option now. And that would be kind of like, look, we made mistakes, and we feel bad. Even at this point, they could kind of say whatever they want about me, whether negative, and they're like, she's insane. They could do that. And then they could be like, look, she's crazy, but we do take this seriously. And here are the reasons why we can't say anything. Let's show them. Or there aren't good reasons. We just didn't know what to say. And then say what they're doing to remove Ben. Give a date when they'll check back. And explain, and this is the tough thing, why I think pulling the thread may end up being something that they can't do, and that's kind of why they feel their hands are tied, at least from a reputational standpoint, is that, like, how do you say you didn't see anything for so long? That's not really a defense at a certain point when your executive producer is underpaid and not on a contract and exploited to the point of leaving. Somebody asked if I think that's the reason for Travis Morningstar leaving. And I was like writing out an answer, which again, speculation, because he and I were not together. He moved to California to follow Ben and then left about a year later. So technically I don't know. He did say to me, like, don't let me move to California. And I was like, don't. But the only other reason I could think of for him leaving, other than Ben himself, is company stuff. Like, that, okay, the lack of a contract and the being overworked and underpaid isn't Ben. So it's LPN. But it's all inextricably linked in my brain. Submitted a question on your thoughts about whether they will say something more. I think that's a great question, and I think that the answer lies with you guys. And what I mean by that is that consumer pressure tends to be the only thing. I think that you are right in your suspicion that they're just returning to business as usual. I think they want this to go away. I think that's why everybody unfollowed me. Because they don't know what to say. I do still think it would be possible to do a mea culpa type thing. Weirdly enough, when I first heard about this, I kind of felt optimistic. I was like, you know what? This is going to be the turning point. Now we're not playing with this misogynistic, exploitative bullshit. We pay our contributors. We don't, like, have a lower class of employee. We don't talk in a kind of shitty way about women sometimes. This will be no more. So I almost thought, like, this is a new era, and I can be part of this new era. So, I don't know. Technically, it's, like, still a possibility that they do that. But I won't feel confident anymore, obviously. But that doesn't mean that you guys can't keep that door open. I think it would be harder to get me to feel good about it, but I'm all, you know, who knows. But Instagram, I don't know if they'll say anything more. I hope they will, and I hope that they continue to get pressure, but people, they know that people's minds move on. And they've done, I mean, like, I don't have the following that they do. Rolling Stone does, so I feel like that was a good start. But what I would push for, if I were a listener, is to know some of the whys, you know, this legal, why can't you say anything? Give us some transparency on what, who knew when, and why, even if a victim didn't want to come forward, none of these other things justified removing him from the business. Really, the only thing that seemed to justify it was being asked for comment by Rolling Stone. And then at that point, tell us what you did. Tell us what you're doing. I think they should be a little transparent about me, but realistically, I feel like there's just as good a chance that they just try to smear me more if that comes up. So it frightens, like, the odds of them saying, you know what, we fucked up and asked somebody to leave because we were angry about the threat to our livelihood that her supporting caused. They're not going to say that. So I feel like they're going to be like, she's a demon. I don't know, that would be kind of fun. Yeah, transparency would restore my faith too, even if, like, deeply offending him. Yeah, everybody was fucking deeply offended, but the thing is, employees don't, like, co-owners of a corporation can just be offended, but employees and, like, subordinates, etc., They love asking people to email side stories. Well, you know what? Email side stories then. It used to be Travis Morningstar who fielded all that shit, but now it's not. Now, honestly, it's probably another subordinate employee who's paid like $30,000 a year. I know they'll just ignore you and all of it. Yeah, so I mean, money talks. That's the only thing. And do what feels right to you guys. I don't want to ever pressure people to do anything, but if you want movement, and I think we all deserve better. I think I deserve better. I think you guys do as fans, as listeners, as people who pay their hefty salaries. You're entitled to more of an explanation. The one employee, I never heard anything more about that. I live in Phoenix, yes. That's a great point too, because like, Rob was so, yeah, no, I know, man. Yeah, to me, it's just like, in reflecting on all of this and the money that was involved and how much, because I wasn't paid at all. Somebody did ask, like, how did they justify that? I don't know. It's hard when you feel like the stakes are so high of asking. And, you know, like, Travis also didn't ask for better. I offered to help him. He ultimately never did ask for better and then later quit. So I feel like the fact that he didn't feel safe asking about totally different scenarios, the fact that I always felt that, like, I shouldn't make waves, and then when I did, I think it at least can help explain and maybe validate a little bit that there's a culture of not being allowed to ask. Yeah, Phoenix. Have I had any further contact with the victim? So Ben's most recent ex, not in contact with her, but I wish her the best and hope all's going well. Yeah, Spun, and I think maybe we can add this as I approach the end. Oh, Andy, that makes me feel so good. I wanted to be part of it and to make bring something that wasn't there. So it's a bummer. But a good place to leave this. I had a nice idea in my brain. Oh, there's like an ethics question, I think, and my friend Kate, who I met through all this, Kate and Annie, you've been amazing. DM'd me. You didn't think I said you didn't reach out, right? Okay. But I met some wonderful people through this, and I really appreciate that. And even like the community that you guys have offered, I feel like I, in a weird way, got the best of the fandom because it's people who have similar interests to LPN, and so they're weird like me, but also they have like a moral compass that at least makes you guys open to listening to what I have to say. So I really appreciate that. But I think there's an ethical question with true crime that, like, I love dark shit. Everybody, I have a lot of dead family members. I'm a freaky little weirdo. So, and I think people at large, like, we're not gonna cut out stories of dark stuff. Like, tragedy is one of the oldest forms of storytelling. Right now, for whatever reason, we love nonfiction crime stories, which is kind of funny in such an era that's weird with truth. That's the one thing that people won't compromise on. But I have to think about, like, why I like this so much. But I don't think we're not going to listen to these stories. So I think the next step for a lot of us, and I'm gonna, like, kind of hash through these. I've been talking to some friends about, who also work in that world, about, like, how do we do this in an ethical way, especially if we're not in communication with the victims. I think that's one big thing to take away. And so folks who are talking about what this means to listening to Spun, I'm glad you guys have that takeaway, because even though I am personally invested, and I cannot deny that, my reason for being personally invested is that I don't agree with the ethical handling of this. And I think it's doubly fucked up to be making money on victim advocacy and to be so not trauma informed, because I think some of it is not malicious. But that's not a good excuse if you're making millions on victims. And the same, unfortunately, goes for Last Podcast on the Left. I think they could probably safely pivot to just, like, not true crime stuff and doing more of the, like, supernatural and aliens and ghosts and stuff like that. But still, you built your career on victims. So I think that, Amber Turd. Yeah. And, like, if you aren't going to be trauma-informed, that's fine. Nobody has a responsibility to go out of their way unless they're going out of their way to talk about these topics. You know what I mean? Anyways, I know I missed some questions. I got into my little brain tangents, and I feel like I appreciate you guys for being so nice. And for having really cogent and compassionate concerns. But if I missed things, because I'm sure I did, hit me up. Like spun, yes, correct. Anyways, I'm here. I'm queer. Want to get married on the ocean. I've been rewatching Arrested Development, if you can't tell. Yeah, the research left something to be desired. Be edgy if you want, but don't pretend you're an advocate. Exactly, man. Cranchops, I think that's very fair, and none of this has to end in some, like, scorched earth anything. It's part of the irony of the response to me being the most definitive thing. Wow, I'm just realizing, like, the most definitive putting their foot down and everybody following suit was against me. Oh, Emily Ann, I've just been like, I Google the email addresses on Substack because I'm so nervous that it's like a burner account. So I am so sorry. Literally just, could you DM me your email and I will approve it like right now. I'm so swamped and I know I'm behind on it, but I hope nobody takes that as me being mean. I promise. Yeah, I think it's partially because I'm a woman and partially because I'm like not the direct victim, so it's easier to get away with it, if that makes sense. Yeah. Making fun of the killers, not the victims, except when we make fun of the victims implicitly. Anyways, thank you guys for hanging out and I was really nervous about this, and everyone was really nice and on their shit, and I hope you have some patience with me losing my train of thought. Mwah. Alright. Be well. I'm gonna watch more TV.